for these last 30 plus years. They lived in Texas together, and that she dies, and now he stepped forward and he's challenging the family, these three brothers, saying that he had a marital relationship with her and he wanted to claim some of the estate. Now, where does your mind go when you typically hear that scenario?
Gold digger.
There you go. So
men can be gold diggers too.
let me tell you, I was very wrong.
Welcome to Life's Third Act, an enlightening look at estate planning, retirement, and beyond.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. This week, we're going to look at the fairly recent death of Shelley Duvall. Sometimes when we talk about people, famous, infamous people, they might have passed away some time ago. And there's some advantages to that because anytime there was fallout and litigation and things that were going on, sometimes we've had cases went on for decades. And so in this case, though, we've done somebody who's died just last year. And so there's some pros and cons. One of the cons is that we don't know in some cases all the outcomes. But in this particular case, we think that there's been some closure, which really is unusual for a year in which, there was, as you'll see, some very imperfect estate planning done. So arguably so imperfect that it didn't exist.
Yeah, but she also didn't have any children.
Yes.
So, she had siblings, but no children of her own, so.
Right. So there are, for various reasons. But we thought that many of you are fans of Shelley Duvall. I'm a fan of hers. I thought that she was great in The Shining.
I loved her in Popeye as Olive Oyl.
Yeah.
Perfect role.
I only saw excerpts from that movie, but I know it got some good reviews. And in interviews, she had a lot of good things to say about her experience there too. So this week we're going to be talking about Shelley Duvall. We're going to talk about her life some. And remember, we're not the experts we're not official biographers of Shelley Duvall. However, we do take the time to unearth those events associated with the life of our subjects that allows us to shine more light on the information that we really care about, that we think is most useful to you and not simply interesting. And that's things relating to your estate planning and things, how do you plan that third stage of your life in such a way that third stage goes wonderfully for you, and as importantly to most of us, that afterlife, that those things that happen that you want to happen with the things that you've spent a lifetime acquiring. So another thing, let me be sure I get this in. I'm guilty of, believe it or not, failing to market services of Cordell and Cordell. We must be unique among YouTubers that actually forget to market adequately our services or product. In this case, the service. Many of you, I hope all of you, know Cordell and Cordell. Cordell and Cordell is a domestic relations firm. Now I can add that we have an estate planning group that was only added to Cordell and Cordell in recent years, a few years ago. So we offer services in almost every state, not every state, but almost. So if wherever you're listening to this in the United States, we encourage you, give us a call. Obviously, we're a fan of doing estate planning in a correct way so that it's about you and the balance of your life, but it also is about what happens thereafter. So we're going to actually offer a 15% discount. Yes. Have we done this before?
No, not since I've been here. 15%, they're going to save.
If you mention Life's Third Act, then we'll give you the 15% reduction. And that's no small amount of money, depending on what you do. So anyway, all right, enough of marketing. I hate to do marketing, but I love to talk about Cordell and Cordell. So Shelley Duvall, we're going to first talk about her life, as those of you who are familiar with the format of this show. We're going to talk about her life and kind of set the stage. And then we're going to take the last part and discuss end of life and decisions relating to estate planning and consequences. All right, so we turn to Sherry. Why don't you give us a little bit of information about the early life, kind of set the stage. Who was Shelley Duvall?
Well, she was the oldest child. She had 3 younger brothers. She was born in 1949, and her parents, pretty, normal people. Her mom was a real estate broker, and her dad was a cattle auctioneer who later became a lawyer.
That's an interesting training. It's probably
right
good
there.
training. Yeah.
Well, she grew up in Houston, Texas, mostly. And like I said, she had 3 younger siblings, all brothers. And everybody started with their names started with the letter S. So you had Shelley, and then you had Scott, Shane, and Stuart. So there was a theme there.
It should be mentioned that she was very close to her family.
Yes.
And this will be a theme that we'll return to. She loved Texas. She was from Texas. And her family, most of her family stayed in Texas. And the family apparently was pretty close, even in later life.
Mm-hmm. Which, like you said, that is very important as we tell the rest of her story. Her mother, which I thought was very interesting, her nickname by way of her mother was Manic Mouse. And we'll touch base on that a little bit later, too. But as a child, she was very imaginative, daydreaming a lot, very creative, lively little girl. She did not have any passion or show any passion toward acting. You know, you have a lot of kids who get into the theater at a young age. She did have one experience with that, and, well, she forgot her lines in the play, and she ran off the stage, embarrassed, crying. So that was her experience.
What was that, like in 8th grade or something?
Yeah, I think like sixth grade. So that was it for her. I mean, I don't think she thought about it again. And she ended up getting a job as a cosmetic salesperson in a department store. And then she went to a party. So this was a total oopsident career move. She went to a party at the age of 20, and at this party, there happened to be some scouts there, and, well, that's where it all began. They really liked her. They thought she would be perfect for this film, and that was Robert Altman's Brewster, McCloud. And Robert had created MASH the movie. That's where he got his big wow moment. But he was there with friends, and they were looking for someone, and it was her.
Yeah, and Altman seemed to really like her because he used her over and over in his work over the decades.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like he just found her very fascinating and interesting. She had a different look.
She did. She had a different look and a different way on screen. Not your classic beautiful model. Mm-hmm. She was, I think, very pretty. Mm-hmm. But it was a different look. Yeah,
definitely. She totally stood out from the others. And, of course, with all the movies that she was a part of, I think the one that stands out the most is that The Shining. That was, like, too scary for me. I never watched it.
Now, she was in, was it McCabe and Mrs. Miller?
She was in, McCabe and Mrs. Miller as well. That was back in 1971.
That was really a very good show. That was an Altman movie, wasn't it?
He did a lot, like you said, with her.
Yeah, so. And that was those of you who haven't seen that was a very good movie. Leonard Cohen soundtrack. It has to be the only soundtrack Leonard Cohen ever has in a movie, I believe. And I was a fan of Leonard Cohen, so when I first watched this movie, which is it's a little dark. By dark, I mean it's not inspiring and uplifting, the movie, and you get this ambience throughout the movie that not good things are going to happen. It has a positive outcome, though. I'll tell you that much. And it had some really prominent. Was Warren Beatty one of those?
Had some prominent stars. Seen that one. I'm going to have to put that on my list.
And it got some good reviews. So it really is a good story, and it's not entirely a downer. But the setting, everything is dark throughout the movie. But and she wasn't. I guess she had a substantial role in that. I do watch that. Those who haven't watched it. But anyway, so she was in several movies. As I was reading over this material and we were putting this together, I was surprised she'd been in so many.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are surprised because, the two that stand out, the most were, of course, when she was in The Shining. And then for me, I was introduced to her with Popeye. So if you she was olive oil, which I was like, I believed that. She was perfect olive oil.
That is great casting. You could pick her out in a lineup as olive oil.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just so natural.
And some people don't know, she actually briefly had a career as a model. Very early on, just after her discovery in acting, she first was a model briefly. And she kind of had that twiggy look.
Yes. She was perfect size. She was so tiny and tall.
And a different look. Those of you who are old enough remember that sort of twiggy era where models were very unhealthily skinny. Yeah. And they had this different look. And you can see
Look
why.
of hunger. No, I'm kidding.
And if you look, right, and if you look at her, well, hunger too, but if you look at her modeling pictures, she was attractive, and you could see why she was a model.
And I think she was also easy to kind of change her look too. You could
Yeah.
add to her, take away. She
You could
look
take away.
glamorous, and then kind of just like a homeless person at one moment, and then glam lady the next.
But the takeaway was really something that happened more often than not in her career. She wasn't often in roles where she was supposed to be the beauty. And even when you think about The Shining, she wasn't intended to be beautiful in that movie and engaging. So they had a look on her that was intended to make her kind of this plain wife. And her role in that got strong opinions both ways.
Yeah, both good and bad.
Both good, but no one was indifferent. It was either that she played who was it? Stephen King was critical of it, and he wrote the book, The Shining. So that was the basis of the screenplay. And his argument was, he said, what was it? She was hysterical and stupid. So I think that was the sentence that he said. She was hysterical and stupid. She spent the movie screaming and was being stupid, something like that. And you could see how somebody who doesn't like her or doesn't like the movie could form that opinion. And on the other hand, though, were people saying, no, she was in many ways the anchor. She was the person who was trying to hold everything together. She was the single person in the movie that rested on her shoulders the interest of the child, what was going on at that hotel, managing a husband going insane, trying to arrange a rescue. So some said, no, that's exactly what she needed to be. She was frantic and desperate throughout the whole movie.
And that movie definitely took a toll on her.
Yeah.
We find that out later in life.
Yeah, and Jack Nicholson said in a quote, and it's kind of cryptic, but he said something to the effect that the director, what's his name? I'm a big fan of his movies. Kubrick, sorry.
Stanley.
I'm a fan of Stanley Kubrick. Anyway, so he according to Jack Nicholson, he was different with her. And Jack didn't explain that, but apparently he was very hard on her. And maybe he was trying to get her to respond more, to make her more frantic and desperate and frustrated. And I suspect that was his motivation, but he was hard on her. He wouldn't have treated Jack the way he treated her. So that probably was what was going on. But anybody who was on that set was sympathetic with her.
A lot of crying.
Yeah.
She spent days crying.
She said literally. Because these scenes were redone for some reason. I didn't hear of Kubrick doing that in Clockwork Orange, but he in this movie he redid a lot of scenes. He did a lot of retakes. So moving along, should we talk about this person she meets in her life in the early 90s?
We can, or we can, I mean, she, I think she's very extreme. She had these scary movies, and then she had some funny ones like Popeye. She was also in Tim Burton's Frankenweenie. So that was another funny one. And then she ended up doing her own thing. She created, produced, and hosted award-winning children's programming, fairy tale theater, tall tales and legends, just all kinds of great bedtime stories for kids, in which she earned 2 Primetime Emmy nominations and a Peabody Award. And she did that. I mean, that was hers, all her.
And that was something where one could argue in many ways that was the peak of her creativity, and that was in the 90s. So because she took on the project, it was her project. She was behind camera, she's in front of camera, and she, chose the actors, the casting. So I think that when you really look at her talent, it seemed to really soar after she was put in charge of material she really believed in. And what's interesting, she didn't have any children.
Yeah, but then too, that's interesting to me because that's what her mother, when she explained how she grew up, she was very creative and always daydreaming and drawing, and that just fits in perfectly with the children's stories.
Yeah, but doesn't it seem odd, though, that somebody like that wouldn't have a lot of kids or some kids?
Yeah, you would think she would, but maybe just so busy with other things. And again, that emotional toll that maybe she was still on with The Shining. Yeah. So this wasn't long after The Shining. But so in the 90s, let's talk about the person who was going to spend
the last 35 years of her life or so, they were going to spend together. Talk about this person.
So Dan Gilroy, she met him, and I mean, they fell in love. And they didn't, like you said, they didn't have any kids together long term, 35 years together. They were never legally married or anything. And so that's where, later we're going to be talking about that too, common law marriage, because after she passed, that's when that really was brought up a lot.
Yeah.
From him. And then that's where he and her brothers kind of came at odds about that.
And she's been out of the public light. So many of you, we thought about this in deciding to do this topic. We thought Shelley Duvall is one of those people that was more in the forefront of our minds in popular culture up through, say, the 20th century. But then in this century, it's just been like radio silence regarding her and her career. There have been a few developments, but not a lot. And so we thought, to what extent will our audience, remember her, much about her? But we decided that most of you, if not all of you, do remember her, and many of you were fans of her. And it's all the more interesting that someone would go from the sort of visibility that she had to utter invisibility, except for a few notorious exceptions, events, which we'll talk about, where she did an interview or kind of did some public things. So we thought that made this story all the more interesting, because here's somebody who is doing very well. She wasn't an A-list actor probably in the 90s, but she definitely was an actor that could have continued being employed as long as she wanted to be employed in Hollywood. She just had a good reputation. And there are lots of jobs for those people. You don't have to be an A actor in order to have regular jobs. And so she walked away from a lot of work and a lot of opportunity. And going with her was this guy, Dan Gilroy, that she met through doing these series of children's-related productions for which she received so many awards, as Sherry just described. And so this is somebody that she got to know professionally first, and they developed a relationship.
Very natural.
And then to give some context, though, to this decision to go from Hollywood to Texas, coming back to a point we were making a while ago, family was important to her, Texas was important to her, interestingly. It kind of made her stand out in some ways from typical people in we think of the Hollywood culture. So she wants to go back to Texas because one of her brothers, Scott, has been diagnosed with cancer. He ultimately dies of this last year. But anyway, so Scott was diagnosed with cancer. She's very close to all three of her brothers. She goes back to Texas, though she grew up mostly in Houston. They bought this property, and there's both a town called Blanca and then there's a county called Blanca, Texas. So they bought this farm. I think that, I don't know if it was just in her name. We didn't check that deed. But I think that it was a jointly owned property, but we don't know that. We think Dan Gilroy probably contributed to it too, but maybe he didn't. Anyway, it's referred to as her farm. So let's just take it at face value, because that'll tie in with this heirship issues we're going to get into here in a little bit. So he moves with her. And let me take a few minutes here and talk about this guy that, to be honest with you, I stereotyped him. When I first read, the headlines and the stories related to her death and the fact that there was a dispute, and that there was this guy who lived with her for these last 30 plus years. They lived in Texas together, and that she dies, and now he stepped forward and he's challenging the family, these three brothers, saying that he had a marital relationship with her and he wanted to claim some of the estate. Now, where does your mind go when you typically hear that scenario? And she's famous, and I hadn't heard of this guy, right? So I'm thinking,
gold digger.
There you go. So
men can be gold diggers too.
let me tell you, I was very wrong. I want to tell you a little bit about this guy, and I'm going to take maybe 4 or 5 minutes doing this just because I think it's important to appreciate this guy. His name's Dan Gilroy. His dad, Frank Gilroy, won a Pulitzer Prize and also won a Tony Award. He's a famous playwright and got these awards for his playwriting. And his wife, Dorothy, this is the mother of Dan Gilroy. She was a recognized sculptor and writer. So Dan, importantly, had a couple of brothers, one Tony, which is the oldest, the youngest is John. So Dan graduated from Dartmouth with a bachelor's degree in English literature. Dartmouth is a good liberal arts school. And he ended up forming this band called Breakfast Club. Now, those of you who say, what was that? Wasn't that a movie from the 80s?
With a Brat Pack.
It was a band. Now, Justin, you're the expert on bands. Do you know anything about Breakfast Club as a band?
I've never heard that. Just a movie.
Well, check it out. Will you see what you can find out real quickly? But anyway, so he was a lead singer of Breakfast Club, and this was in the early 1980s. And he was the front guy. Guess who else was in that band? Madonna.
Oh.
Yeah, briefly. And she was in the band. And he had this band with his brother Ed. The band enjoyed pop success. Their self-styled 1987 album featured a hit single, Right on Track.
Is that gonna get you back? I know that song. You're right on. I know.
I'm
Learning stuff
impressed.
today.
Yeah, I know
never
that
knew
song
this.
now.
She seems too young to have known any of this.
1979.
Right on Track. Okay, well, that was one of their hits and maybe their only top 10 hit. During this period, Gilroy briefly dated Madonna. Briefly dated Madonna, teaching her guitar and playing a formative role in her early music journey. After Madonna's departure, Breakfast Club continued until 1990. So anyway, he's cast in one of the productions that Shelley was doing. Mother Goose, Rock and Rhyme, 1980. He co-starred as Gordon Goose, and then he alongside Shelley. And this was a Disney musical. So he also became a director. A little bit more about this guy. So he and Duvall, remember, moved from L.A. to Blanca, Texas, around 1994, and lived there both the rest of their lives. So here's a little bit about the director, Gilroy, and this is the same guy. Now I'm going to distinguish him from his brother, but. He wrote the screenplay for a movie called Free Jack in 94, Chasers in 94, Two for the Money. He was executive producer, screenwriter. These, incidentally, are not
They're not
prominent
big
productions.
movies,
A few are. Real Steel, 2011, screenwriter. He was co-screenwriter with his brother of The Bourne Legacy. Now, how many of you have seen this? I know. And to be honest with you, I think it's one of the best, if not the best, of the Bourne movies. Yeah, it's
Okay.
It was a different one. It's where there was somebody else brought in to play the role. He's a prominent actor that I should remember his name. But anyway, so Nightcrawler, 2014, not a big one. A movie that got great acclaim, Roman J. Israel, Esquire. This was a guy who was a lawyer who made some, the issue was ethical decisions he made about his career. It got good reviews. He directed and wrote that movie, and it's still around. You see it a lot. It'll come up in feeds and stuff on your Netflix or Prime. Roman J. Israel, Esquire. And then this movie called Velvet Buzzsaw in 2019. That's his last work in 2019. So he's still doing screenwriting while he's living in Texas, and I'm sure going back with some regularity to L.A. But one thing let me mention is his brother. His brother is the writer, has written virtually the entire series of the Bourne, that whole Bourne collection is his brother, Tony. So, and Tony has done, let's see, Michael Clayton. Tony wrote that, which was a prominent movie. The redefining Star Wars storytelling with Andor. So not Star Wars, but Andor, which is where it was a reimagining of Star Wars in some form. I didn't see it. So Tony really is an A-list writer and in Hollywood. That's his brother. So anyway, I took time to talk about this just to say that, many people are stereotyping this guy who came out saying that we were married and I should have a claim to this as just being a gold digger. But this guy is very impressive.
Yeah.
Smart guy, talented,
He's
quite
got his own money.
Yeah, he has to have his own money. I don't know that often you don't get residuals that way unless maybe his brother can manage residuals, but mostly a screenwriter will not get that. They get paid a lump sum, but often it's generous, particularly if it's a movie that, with great promise. Anyway, let's move on then. So I don't know how well we cover here what happened to Shelley from a psychiatric, a mental health. I'll say mental health. From a mental health standpoint, sometime late 90s, early, aughts of the 21st century. It's hard to say that any event occurred, but there were reports of her behavior becoming increasingly strange. She became withdrawn, not with her family. Apparently her brothers continued to interact with her, but she was on this, it was a 10-acre farm. Value was somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000, I've heard. That was the main asset she had when she died, incidentally. We'll come to that. But she had this farm, and that's where she chose to live. And so she and Dan, when they were on the farm, it was them. And that's what's really hard to reconcile when you look at film clips. There are a few film clips, a few interviews, a few news reports about her in the last 25 years, we'll say, of her life, beginning, say, 2000 to 2025, that just leaves you wondering what happened.
Yeah, because in 2016, she did agree to an interview with Dr. Phil.
Yeah.
And that's where you have to be, because, obviously Dr. Phil wants folks to watch his show, and you have the editors who made sure that the sizzle reel, if you will, that folks got to see, the promo that you got to see on TV before it actually aired, was pretty controversial because it highlighted her in a not so good light to get folks to watch.
I have to tell you, those of you who have not watched, you should really watch the film of Dr. Phil. I paused because I guess I'm among those who felt that it was exploitive and that there was a better way to help her than to put her in that situation and to put before the world her deteriorated,
for ratings, perhaps.
Just very unflattering picture of her. Her look, she had gained weight. She just looked like she had aged 50 years. It was just really, really sad. It was almost like those of you who've seen the movie Hush, Hush, Sweet Charlotte. Some of you won't get that. Anyway, so it was like that. She was just appeared to be an old woman who had not taken care of herself and was just in disarray. And her thoughts were even worse, meaning she said that she thought Robin Williams was still alive. She said something had crawled up her and was inside her and causing her this pain. She said that the military was listening. And I could go on and on. This was somebody who had psychiatric problems. Whether they would be considered legally incompetent, as bad as this interview looks, and some of you won't watch it and shouldn't, because you do walk away disturbed about how she can go from the person we've been describing in this, and we all saw in the 90s and the 80s, become this person. And you think, how did that happen? But bad as that might appear, it's not clear that that's incompetence. That she had really bizarre ideas and made awful decisions about her life and health. We know that. She let herself go completely. And I just think that it's hard to help somebody when that happens and they're not in a condition that the law would say was legally incompetent. And so allowing someone, a loved one or a ward of the court, or someone who'd be appointed by the court and declare her a ward, to be able to take over and help her with her life or make decisions for her. I don't think she was there based on what I saw, as bad as that was.
Yeah.
So she had diabetes, and the diabetes you imagine the person I just described would not take care of the diabetes, and that when she died, which she did in 2024, that was attributed. The most primary result would have been, or the proximate result would have been the diabetes. But we all know that it was a bunch of decisions, a bunch of things going on. One thing I would say, there's no evidence of any alcohol, any chemical abuse between her or Dan.
Yeah, or foul play or anything like that has been brought up.
No foul play is suspected. And with her and Dan, there's no evidence at all, which is a little unusual. Hollywood, you think about at least alcohol abuse. But there was none of that, and no one has suggested it. So you have these two people who are sober, and they're living out there, and I'm thinking Dan is seeing her. So
Every
this guy
day.
that I just described to you, and it has me scratching my head. I'm thinking, what's he thinking? And was there anything to be done? But by all accounts, these people, let's put it this way, I've read nothing, I could find nothing to suggest that there was any neglect on his part, any abuse or anything like that on his part. I saw nothing to suggest that.
There's no negativity out there about them or fighting or anything like that.
So we go from this person who had all these marvelous qualities and all this talent in the first maybe 2/3 of, I'd say first half of her life. Mm-hmm. And then almost the last half of her life, the last 35 years or so, 30, we would say, was on a trajectory that wasn't healthy.
Yeah, because she was basically out of Hollywood from 2002. And she came back in 2023 at the age of 74, and she was in a film, The Forest Hills, and that was her first since 2002.
And let me tell you, I wasn't going to look at her in that movie because I can't. I can't imagine what role she played to where she could look like that. But I'm sure there are roles like that in movies. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't going to watch it.
Yeah, you want to remember her the way she was.
Yeah. So we have this period of isolation for a period of time in which these parties continue to live together. They are not married. So Dan and Shelley, they live together in many ways as husband and wife, you would think. They were active in the community. They did things locally, not a lot, but they were seen periodically locally. They definitely weren't, social is too strong a word. So Shelley has this diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which worsens over time. And that, coupled with various other things, as we indicated, she died last year in 2024. So at her death, it turns out that there's not a will. Now, given the person that I've just described to you, that probably is not a surprise. She just, again, that's a further piece of evidence that something wasn't working in her brain in the way that it did when she was earlier in her life. Earlier in her life, we see her making a lot of strategic decisions, managing her life pretty well. And while it's true, some people are good at managing their lives and they still don't do estate planning. But in any case, at least there was a person there that planned as to other aspects of her life. But the last 25 years, there's no evidence that she was kind of in command of events in any healthy way. So unsurprisingly, there is no estate planning. Now, also, I'll raise the point here, too, about Dan. Dan, who we know is a person who's smart, is successful, talented, presumably in much better shape in cognitive terms than Shelley. Mm-hmm. Why would he have not suggested they resolve this in some way, including the subject of getting married?
Yeah.
So I just wonder, I'm so interested to know more about Dan Gilroy because of his, large part because of his relationship with her, and what is there about him that he chose to live in this situation? And what would he say in his defense if someone were to say to him, why didn't you do something to help? He may have a very good answer for that. He may say, you think I haven't tried? And et cetera. So at least there was somebody there with her, and it was somebody with her who wasn't living off her, as one might stereotype. So the two of them live in this situation. She dies. There is no will. And she has 3 living brothers, the only living relatives that would be candidates for inheritance, I think, under Texas law. We're going to talk more about this in our next episode. But so I want to set the stage here for we have this person who's died. Shelley has assets, probably not much more than $500,000.
Which is so hard to believe. I figured she had so much more than that.
I don't know. I don't think. I mean, I can understand. She probably didn't have a lot of residuals from her earlier work. Mm-hmm. She didn't have a lot of power of negotiation in those earlier years, so that would have been relevant. But as time goes by, those numbers, you have depreciation, or you have inflation that results in the depreciation in purchasing power. So, she probably had enough money coming in. And I don't think she in any way lacked money to live on. I think, yes, she did have money coming in, doubtlessly related to that. But not a lot, is my suspicion. And that raises another question, is that Dan may have thought marriage would have implications for his assets. We don't know what they are. But maybe they're significant, and maybe there was more downside for him than upside by marrying. That's thinking in financial terms. Maybe that wasn't the driving consideration at all. So she has around $500,000 in assets, so we read. That's probably somewhere in the ballpark, and the bulk of that being this land. And now we have a dispute where we have Dan who says, I lived effectively as her husband, and we were married under Texas law, and I should get the right that a husband would get in intestate succession, where somebody inherits where there isn't a will, and a spouse always commands more than anybody else in those situations, even children. So this kind of sets the stage for us to stop. And let's stop here.
Okay.
And what we'll do is we'll have one more episode, and in that next episode, though, we'll have the Cordell and Cordell attorney that I've talked about, Kelly Burris, and she'll be on. She's the expert in domestic relations, Texas domestic relations, and she can shed a lot of light on these questions relating to, what is common law marriage? What are the criteria? And she'll have some other things to say about this situation. So I encourage you to come back for our next episode. It'll be our last episode relating to the life, death, and decisions of Shelley Duvall. So we invite you to tune in for our next episode. This has been Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell and Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.